We will kick off our October 30th meeting of the task force on reimagining public safety. Quickly just go over our agenda for the day. Everybody can see my screen. Give me a thumbs up if you can see that. Great. So agenda for today, I'll provide the welcome and go over some final logistics. We'll do our subcommittee report outs, starting with human services, use of force, and then community engagement and healing. And then we, Cordell from the mayor's office will provide some themes. He's been working on writing the summaries from the, I think it's about 6 listening sessions that we've done with community members across the city. And then we will end with several closing exercises and reflection activities. The first one will be led by Daryl and Carol, and then we'll end with Brian Williams. Since Brian really helped kick off the task force and provide our orientation, I thought it'd be nice to have him help close us out. So that's the agenda for today. This is our last publicly scheduled task force meeting for right now, as task force members finalize their recommendations and report that'll be delivered to the mayor's office by the end of the day on November 5th. Once I receive those subcommittee report outs and reports, Cordell and I will work to kind of put all of that together, compile the different reports, provide table of contents and just formatting and all of that different stuff, and then that will be released to the public for their consumption. And as we've mentioned a couple times on these listening sessions, even though the task force might not be meeting every single week as we have been now, the task force will certainly be a key body in the implementation of the task force recommendations moving forward. So y'all are not going to get rid of me yet. We will continue to work together going forward to ensure smooth implementation of these recommendations, because they are really going to take, as we'll hear today with the report outs, they're really going to take robust community engagement and input outside of this task force to just ensure smooth implementation and buy-in from the community of the direction that you all are advising that the city go in terms of reimagining and expanding our public safety practices and agenda. So with that, you will certainly hear more from the task force moving forward, but this is our last live stream meeting until after the report is released on November, until the report comes out after November 5th. And so with that, I will turn it over to, is Tori on the line yet? She's not on the line yet, then I will turn it over to Sheba, Natasha, Courtney to just provide kind of a report out of where your recommendations are. And then we'll move on to the community engagement and healing group after you.
All right, good afternoon. This is Sheba Williams. I am one of the 3 co-chairs of the Use of Force subgroup. The Use of Force subgroup was challenged with very specific goals in the beginning of this task force. We were asked to look at RPD's use of force policy and work through reimagining public safety around the use of force. While our primary focus was addressing RPD's use of force policy, it became abundantly clear that use of force and abuse of power by authoritative figures happens in our communities with people who aren't always arrested, who aren't always comfortable reporting harms, that happen in our schools via SROs, that happen with corrections officers in Richmond City Jail, and that are oftentimes disregarded when reports are made. We were blessed to be able to speak to many residents around the city via listening sessions and through opening spaces for individuals who aren't often aware of the power of their voices when they do report things. We came up with some very broad recommendations, and we've also been taking recommendations from individuals through these listening sessions, and we've been talking through quite a few things. But the 5 from the initial report were around humanizing RPD's policies. We found that talking to different groups, Communication is a problem. Some people don't know their beat officers. Some people don't have a relationship built, and it reflects in the community. Some groups have great relationships. They have a police liaison. They have someone they can report to and someone they can speak to, and that oftentimes lead to better relationships and not having so many reports of use of force. We found that we wanted to reimagine training practices. We wanted to implement trauma informed care, cultural sensitivity training. We wanted to implement a citizens academy where before a recruit is hired, they get to engage in the communities that they will be acting in and working in. We wanted RPD to take a look at how some officers come and oversee communities and never engage with the people in the communities. You may see them in the cars, you may see them posted up in different places, but they may never get out of the car to walk through and let people know who is it that's patrolling their areas, which leads to things like um, there always being a disciplinary action attached to a police officer showing up versus having a balanced relationship that could prevent some of those use of force incidents from happening in the first place. We talked about making sure that the Citizens Academy had a voice that the people led, and talked about cultural differences in different communities because clearly we know that there are one, two, three, sometimes four different Richmonds. We wanted citizens to be involved in the process and give their oversight before a police officer was hired, because we found that the hiring process happens and it is very difficult to remove an officer once they are already in place. We talked about increasing communication, education, and transparency, both for the department and for citizens in Richmond. We want to make sure that Richmond citizens were able to navigate the website properly, because the website can be cumbersome and tricky and hard to navigate, and be able to find the information they need to do things. We wanted to have an anonymous reporting measure for those people who didn't feel comfortable reporting harms in their communities, but still wanted to take action to make sure that themselves and others were protected from harms that were caused. We wanted to improve accountability measures, which kind of goes hand in hand with transparency, education, and building relationships. We wanted to make sure that opportunities were created to improve officers' mental health. We, at the very last meeting, group meeting of ours, had a discussion about the listening sessions that had taken place up to that point. We talked to people from all walks of life, from all around the city. We even got the opportunity to talk to beat officers. We have our Commonwealth attorney on our subgroup, and we have some police officers on this force. And we found from talking to the beat officers that structural racism and systems that have been in place are very resistant to change. We were told that citizens did not have a place in telling police officers how to do their jobs. We were told that police officers just wanted to disregard some calls of service and just not show up. They were not interested in making change that many people in the community have been asking for. So our last recommendations, which may very well need to be the most important, is to divest from policing and invest in communities and futures of citizens of this city.
Thank you, Shiva. Any questions for this subgroup as they move into submitting their final report? All right, wonderful. Thank you, Shiva. We'll move on to Birdie and Ron.
Okay, this is Birdie Jameson. I'm going to start off the report for our subcommittee, which is community. Hello? Can you all hear? Yes? Okay.
I can hear you, Birdie.
Yep. Okay, community healing and engagement. And our report, basically, we have consolidated our original recommendations down to 4 recommendations. And I'm going to start off talking about one of the recommendations that we're very excited about. And that is to have community healing and engagement monthly activities, as well as to have periodic ones that are probably quarterly. So our subcommittee is joining forces with the Office of Delegate Dolores McCann to have a kickoff event for community healing. And on November 27th, we plan to have a virtual event from 1 to 3 o'clock p.m. And the day is called I Am My Brother and Sister's Keeper Day. It was implemented back in 2018 through a joint resolution that was patroned by Delegate McQuinn. And over the past 2 years, they've done in-person, smaller group community healing. So we want to sort of have this as a springboard to put forth our community vision for massive resilience. And basically the plan is to have many featured community leaders, faith leaders, youth speakers that could give us an inspirational message about community healing and community engagement. We also are going to have creative expressions of community healing. And in the middle of the event at 2 o'clock p.m., we will have a moment of silence, and we're going to call for a statewide moment of silence in commemoration of massive resilience and community healing. And so at this point, we want to encourage everyone to save the date for us. We're still working on a few of the logistics with the virtual platform. And once we get that in place, we have a lot of people who have already agreed to assist us, lots of speakers, lots of creative expressions, and dance, music, drums, etc. So what I want to do is give people my email address if they are willing to help us, or if they know speakers or some type of creative expression that they would like to recommend for us to include in this day of healing, contact me. I'm going to give my email address right now. It's real easy. It's my name, Birdie, BIRDIE _Jamison, JAMISON @yahoo.com. So as I said, if you have anyone that you think would be interested in participating, then of course we want everyone to tune in on that day to join us in this community day of healing. We have also, over the past couple of weeks, we've been also participating in the listening sessions, and we have had very in-depth subcommittee discussions with our members. We have been doing research, we've been reading. Ron Bagat gave all of us these beautiful, we're modeling t-shirts for you, sweatshirts for you all today. And we have been reading and trying to really embrace this. We realize that there is a lot of work that still needs to be done. Once this task force has completed our recommendations, that there's still quite a bit that needs to be done. And so Dr. Bagat is going to talk about our other 3 recommendations. And again, we're excited about this virtual event on November 27th. And please support our efforts in making this a wonderful day of community healing. All right.
Thank you, Birdie. I just want to let everybody know that this swag that our subcommittee members are wearing represents a slogan or a phrase that indicates that everybody on the task force, everybody in the community, regardless of your experiences, can contribute to community engagement and community healing. This slogan, I am the work, means that we are all products of our experiences. We all have something that we can contribute to making our city more equitable, just for all citizens. And one of the recommendations that we made that Birdie pointed out was to start to have periodic community engagement and healing events. They could either be annual, they could be biannual, or they could be monthly. But these events, as she said, are designed to really promote Ubuntu, to promote the spirit of interconnectedness, where I am because we are. Our other 3 And this swag is, if you want to get an I Am the Work hoodie or zip up or t-shirt, just let one of us know. And as long as supplies last, we'll be able to provide everybody on the task force with one of these items that also shows our effort to collaborate with other city agencies like Richmond Public Schools, which is also a part of this whole restorative practices and trauma responsive practices movement. So in addition to the community engagement and healing events, we have 3 other recommendations. We consolidated up to 8 recommendations into 4. So the events that Bertie mentioned is one. And as she said, we have an event coming up on Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, and reach out to her to get more information, to participate, and also to help promote. The other 3 recommendations revolve around this training strategy or this mindset called massive resilience. And massive resilience, I mean, for folks who are from Virginia, and probably for people who are like familiar with the history around Brown versus Board of Education, Virginia implemented a strategy called massive resistance to go against the Supreme Court ruling to desegregate schools. So our idea of massive resilience is it's kind of a synergy, bringing together all of these different efforts to counteract the impact and the aftermath of massive resistance. So coming out of Virginia, massive resilience has resonated with a lot of Virginia residents. And basically this strategy, this emergent strategy, is focused on equity, justice, and liberation. And it's based on the idea or the principles of unity, self-determination, purpose, and creativity. And there are 4 spheres to it and 4 arcs. And the 4 spheres are art, culture, education, and health. And the arcs are really where the rubber meets the road. The 4 arcs of massive resilience strategy are trauma healing, restorative practices, mindfulness, and artfulness. We propose to do restorative practice trainings for adults, youth, community leaders. Another one of our recommendations is specifically geared towards restorative justice practices, where we want to implement community building training, which is already happening in Richmond Public Schools, and we see that as beneficial for the community, and even governmental agencies, community healing circles, which could be implemented to address conflicts that occur and empower and educate community members on how to address and redress and resolve their own conflicts, our own conflicts within the community. And then one of the restorative justice practices that we're very excited about recommending and proposing, something called community conferencing circles, which are a form of community arbitration for restorative engagement. It's a culturally responsive diversion program, that is, it's based on having an office or a center for restorative justice, where these practices are implemented to increase the community's capacity for accountability and responsible justice. This process will be designed to empower community residents with their own means of resolving disputes that would otherwise be settled by, the normal means, traditional adjudicatory courses of action, i.e. the police. We've already held some listening sessions with youth. We've also been working behind the scenes with City Council, with the police department, with the Commonwealth Attorney's Office to figure out the best way to establish this process so that it could be sustainable and transformative. Another practice that we want to incorporate into our restorative justice practices and this Office for Restorative Justice is around restorative justice theater, or this concept that came up called Connect, where we use the creative arts and social justice practices to build a more restorative community. I think our major recommendation is to establish, we were calling it a Center for Racial and Restorative Justice. It could also be an office for restorative justice that's aligned with some of the other offices that are already in place within the city, like the Office for Community Trust Building, where we could collaborate around the Ambassador Program, the Mayor's Youth Academy, because one of the things that we see is essential to community engagement and healing is tapping into the creativity, the resourcefulness, the energy, and the ambition of our community youth so that we can get them involved in providing insight into solutions, but also making sure that we're equipping them and training them with these type of skills and strategies so that they could play an instrumental part in reimagining public safety in our city. So essentially, we decided to focus on 3 specific areas to consolidate our recommendations, and these areas of focus include acknowledging that harm has happened, the acknowledgement of harm, to be transparent about the root causes of the problems that we're facing, the challenges that we're facing, and look at these challenges as opportunities for growth and transformation. The second area of focus, community engagement program, strategies, events, and initiatives, as I mentioned, and Bertie has mentioned, and to support a vision of public safety where policies and practices are designed and developed and implemented that increase public trust and accountability. And we also see that there's an interconnectedness between all of the different subcommittees. And this Office for Restorative Justice could be a space, a place, a process where we can connect these different recommendations and we can develop and expand these recommendations. And one final point is that our committee had lots of discussions about the impact of structural racism as an underlying cause and a significant social determinant of not only racial health disparities, but economic injustices and disproportional violence in and against Black and Brown communities. And so we see that this is an urgent need to reimagine public safety by acknowledging the harm, building resilience for challenging systemic racism, and adopting these culturally responsive practices that would be designed for healing community relationships.
Thank you, Ram. Any questions or comments for the community engagement and healing group before we move on to Tori? All right. And Tori, I'm going to turn it over to you now, but I'm also going to ask that, we had allotted an hour for our meeting today, and I know we have a couple of reflection exercises as well. So I don't know if you have a quick and dirty version of what you all have talked about this week.
Yes.
Just in the nature of making sure that we hear from our other folks today.
No problem. I can barely speak anyway. So just the quick and dirty. With the Human Service Lens group, of course, we focus a lot on the rerouting and what possible calls could be rerouted. We identified what some of those calls would be. We also covered and looked at the accessibility to resources and programmings within our communities and that they operate on non-traditional hours. We also talked a little bit and started really fine tuning this notion of the intentionality of targeting our young people to expose them to careers that they're not often exposed to. And along with all of the recommendations that we're making, one of the key to bring all of this together is to stop relying on the police and begin to rely on some of those natural leaders in our communities, those natural accesses that's in our community, those small organizations that are working on the ground, and how do we um, begin to provide some funding to support those small organizations that are working in our community, a lot of times with little to no funding. And how do we begin to shift the narratives rather than fund from a negative narrative, identify those strengths that's happening in the community and fund from a more positive perspective. So that's it in a nutshell. Any questions?
Lori. I know that you all talked a lot about, which calls for service you're considering this week as well. So looking forward to seeing the final report there and final recommendations on that.
Yes.
All right, so moving through our agenda, as I mentioned earlier, we've held a number of listening sessions with civic association leaders, with community members, with youth, and with our patrol officers. And so Cordell Hayes in the mayor's office really helped to create that framework for those listening sessions and help do a lot of the outreach. And so I'll turn it over to Cordell just to provide kind of the high level themes that came out of our listening sessions. And if any of the co-chairs have anything that they would like to add, please feel free to do so. And then we will turn it over to Daryl, who will run our first kind of reflection and closing exercise. So Cordell.
All right. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cordell Hayes, and I'm within the mayor's office. So for the past about 3 weeks, we have had about 8 listening sessions, and they've been pretty enlightening the entire time. And I feel like we've been kind of running a marathon because we've been having them back to back at some days. But overall, what has come out of the listening sessions that they are definitely in support of the recommendations. And overall are definitely wanting to see, some type of transformation happen when in regards to public safety. The first one that we had was with the Richmond Tennis, with the RTOs, and pretty much overall from that standpoint is that they actually do support having the police in their neighborhoods, but they do want to see a lot more community programming. And one of the big things that came out of the 7, with the exception of the patrol officer listening session, was wanting more budget or funding for community organizations, and especially for those that are doing the grassroots one-on-one support with the youth, and pretty much wanting to uplift those organizations and providing them with the monetary means instead of always providing the funding for bigger nonprofit organizations. Another thing that we came to realize was that, the effects or the positive effects of active and engaged civic association. And pretty much from that standpoint, specifically with the Northside listening session, is that they overall and historically have had positive police support and positive police interactions. And overall, everybody pretty much supported, the rerouting system with the Human Service Lens group. And there pretty much was, I guess I would say overall, nobody really, I guess at least with the civic association groups, nobody really expressed any type of negative interactions with the police, which was interesting. But they did have like an overwhelming support in connection with that police or with that beat officers. So they did encourage more communication from RPD because it wasn't clear, what they are currently doing when it comes to community outreach. So they did want to see more clear communication from RPD to support that community efforts because it's really not clear what they are doing when it comes to the outsider. One was interesting, one theme was how to overcome stigma when it's for nonviolent offenders, and that kind of went to the use of force group because one of the main concerns that came out of one of the listening sessions was implicit bias, and how does that look, and or I guess how does the training really look when it comes to actually effectively engaging a police officer or patrol officer before they're hired to ensure that they really know their community members. So trying to get to the root of the cause to try to eliminate any type of implicit bias. And last night we had the West End Civic Associations, and they were really on board with the recommendations. And overall, one of the themes that came out of their listening session was time, and just making it very apparent that these recommendations are pretty much something that will definitely need to take time, being that it is a public safety aspect to it. And one of the members actually comes from a safety background, and he expressed that it could possibly take 5 years, but there, of course, are certain things that they were wanting to see to readily happen within the communities. And Maggie, am I missing anything, or Sheba, or Tori?
Yeah. So there were some negative interactions in our East End and youth and in our community listening sessions. Even with negative interactions, they wanted to figure out how to have better relationships with police. It wasn't all good. It wasn't kumbaya in every neighborhood. What was clear was there were different interactions in certain parts of the city and not. So just to give some background, the Civic Association leaders and presidents mostly are from older backgrounds that don't really engage with the police very much. So, they didn't have many negative interactions, but there absolutely were reports of negative interactions, negative communication, and things like that. So we don't want you all to think that, we didn't have a problem, we just did this 90-day task force for no reason. The reason why the task force was brought together is because there are problems that are not being addressed for everybody in the same manner across the board in the city. So,
and I think you're right, Sheba. Even those community members that had negative experience with the police express a desire to have a relationship with the police they that was a more friendlier, inviting. They didn't want to always feel like they were doing something wrong, and so I think that's a good sign.
I would also add that, I think what I was saying, there was a lot of support for the recommendations because folks understood that there is a need for change. And I think one thing that an additional theme I will add was the need, and Sheba touched on this already, but the need to really invest back into communities and lift communities up that have historically been disinvested in the past. And so how do we do that as a community? How do we create a community-centric model for public safety that doesn't end or begin with police? And I would say that a majority of folks that we spoke with agreed with that future-looking, path for the city to head in that direction. And we definitely educated a lot of folks. I will say that as well. I think a lot of folks had either hadn't heard of the task force initial recommendations yet. And so we may note that, going forward with this final report, that we really need to sketch out a robust community communication strategy, which will really, and I will need to have all the task force members help to, share this report within your networks, within your communities, so that we really can get the word out about the work that we've been doing over 90 days, because as many of us have acknowledged, this has not been easy. These have been really difficult, challenging conversations that we've taken on, and now it's time to really expand that conversation going forward. So I think that was another theme that came out, is that we just really need to make sure that we're communicating this over and over again. Lions, Rom, I know that you all were in the youth listening session as well. Is there anything else that you would want to add,
Maggie,
or anything else that you would want to add? And Natasha, of course.
I do want to say that a lot of people on this task force have brought up the issue of, will this matter? Will this actually bring about change? And to hear that report, Cordell, and how you say that there were no negative outcomes, really does speak to why we have these concerns. For that to be put down on paper, when we all sat during those listening sessions and heard the negative interactions with police.
Well,
It's really
Natasha,
genuine.
so overall, I would say specifically when it comes to the civic associations, majority of them stated that they did not have negative, interactions. So I would say with the reentry group, with the youth listening session, because I hadn't finished my entire list. The youth listening session, RTO, and of course with the reentry group, they did mention that they did not have positive experiences. So, but I would say with the civic association groups, with them, majority of them did not have any bad experiences with the police officers.
They
So
weren't a
here's
reentry
my
group. They were a group of varying citizens who just are not always invited to the table. Only one person had a reentry background, but the rest were regular citizens.
Maggie? You had to go?
So did that clear that up, Natasha? I wasn't saying all of the listening sessions were kumbaya and everything, but majority of the civic association listening sessions, they did report not having negative experiences.
I think language matters, and the way that it was presented initially, it seemed like everybody was in the kumbaya state. When
my apologies.
They were not. So I appreciate you clearing that up. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I have one question. You said there was a reentry group?
It wasn't a reentry group.
Oh, I didn't think we had a reentry group. Okay.
I'm sorry, the one that was this past Tuesday or Wednesday?
Yeah, they weren't.
Okay.
The one from the East End?
No, we did the additional one that we added, that Natasha and I invited people. There were members from the LGBTQ community, members who are oftentimes just not invited to the table. Okay. I think only one person has lived experience, like incarceration, but everybody else were just people who just are not always invited to the table, because what we were saying was, with civic association, the majority of the demographics were older individuals who don't necessarily come in contact with police in a negative light, which was great. Like even in the West End, they said that they called the police and they regretted calling the police because they had a neighbor who clearly had some mental health issues, and they felt that the police officer didn't address it properly. So while the overwhelming majority were saying, hey, we never had any negative experience with police, there are people who weren't invited to the initial conversations that said, hey, we did. And even in the East End session, which is clear about disparate treatment in the city, there were negative interactions.
I think we could do like maybe a more scientifically based assessment of perception and attitude. But Lyons and I had a conversation with a group of youth. I wouldn't say we could take what they said to be like representative, because it was just like a very small sample. But Lige, do you want to share what the youth were saying about their experience with the police? And it's just kind of to
Uh,
get some perspective on it. It's not
yes,
to say like that this is what all youth
yes.
think. This is this particular youth that we talked to on Saturday.
Thanks, Ram. I would just say that I try not to talk a lot and listen more. And there's a student who was like, I don't really have anything to add. And then he was just really speaking some wonderful things. But the what was clearly present was a sense of defeat, right? Of working within the system you already know, right? One of the students said, for example, well, we know if it's our word against theirs, who's going to win, right? And so I think, Cordero, I hear what you're saying, but I think people are going to work within the system we know. I think people want safety, right? And if we often say police is safety, then people might say we want police, but what they want is safety, and we had students who will walk up to a business and they'll lock the door so that they don't come in, or they're not allowed to come into the store if they're in a group of with several other students, and we had what 60-70% of our conversation revolved around racism, you know and it's going to be harder to get a task force together to eradicate racism in the city of Richmond, but I think that's where I go back to our recommendations, and I look at how can we continue this work, perhaps with an office or a center of racial and restorative justice, because this is a all-encompassing problem that has a lot of parts that come to it, and therefore a lot of things that have to change. But there, I would just be careful because there's a lot of working within what we already know, right? And we already know that, like, well, if this happens, this is going to happen. Well, and I feel like oftentimes, to touch a little bit on the SRO thing, we try to say, let's have our youth build relationship with our police officers, but I mean, they don't have to build relationship with the paramedics or the firefighters, right? So if we're talking about public safety, we have to be careful about, yes, having a healthy relationship and knowing the community that you're serving is important, but kind of tread lightly in that area, because we have, I think we work within the realm that we know. Please wait. Yeah.
I have an insight I'd like to share on this, if I may.
Your card.
Sure, Mr. Burley, go ahead.
I think that the success of this task force is going to
Remove
help
card.
the
Processing.
longevity
Please.
of our results of our work. It's an important factor that how successful this is will be of no worth if we don't establish, per se, carrying the torch. Uh, we meaning the task force, we meaning the community, we meaning the police department and all the other agencies. It's going to be essential that we carry a torch consistently year after year, with politics as it is, mayors changing, city council members changing, police chiefs changing, patrolmen getting transferred to detectives and lieutenants getting transferred from one precinct to another. It's almost like a piece of driftwood in the James River. These different people that have these responsibilities change day in and day out in their assignments and their political objectives in life. And these things that we're talking about can fall through the cracks. So my point of importance is that whatever our end chapter will be in our recommendations is that it's just much significant now as it is a year from now and 2 years from now with the next chief, and that patrolman who worked Fulton Bottom now is working in the West End, and that police officer that was a captain in the West End is now over in the East End, and everybody is on the same page with what we're talking about today. They're on the same page 2 and 3 and 4 years from now. And if we don't do that, and as you know, society is short-sighted and have short memories as to how we focus on things, and then 6 months later we've forgotten about it. So if it's any gift I have to share to this task force, is that the success of it will be we keep the torch aflow, aglow, and making sure that we have the finest police officers, making sure our communities are singing in the same congregation as our public servants, that we serve well, and that the public appreciates what we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burley. All right, folks, before we move on to our reflection section, any other additional comments or questions? And Aman, I saw your question about the listening sessions, and yes, we understand that they're not completely representative of the entire city. This just beginning to scratch the surface and start the feedback process. So that will absolutely be acknowledged in the report. All right, so Daryl, do you want to kick it over to you to run through one of our reflection exercises?
Can I ask a question first, Maggie?
Of course, Robert, go ahead.
I believe it was Miss Jameson talking about the hiring process. If I'm not mistaken, I believe it was Miss Jameson. And could it be a recommendation that people from selected communities be part of the process of officers being hired? I didn't hear anything about who was interviewing these potential polices. Does the city do that, or a hired agency, or and when we find out who does that, could it become a recommendation that people in the communities be part of that process?
Carol, are you on the line to help answer that question about hiring for RPD?
Hey Maggie, this is Brian. I'm not sure if Carol is on or not, but I know a lot of places you do have residents of communities serve on interview panels. I'm not sure if that's part of the practice and policy within RPD, but it's not out of the norm to have residents serve on interview panels.
And I think Sheba, Natasha, I think in the use of force group, we did talk about hiring practices and ensuring, I know that Dr. Pelfrey had talked about the screening process and how to improve that as part of that. But I think that had kind of been more of the focus of the group, correct?
So for clarity, the current practice of like rating implicit bias is like one of the lowest in methodologies used when assessing police officer hires. I don't think that there's a process for revisiting bias as an officer is on the force, but the Citizens Academy would only address talking to recruits prior to being hired. That is a great question that is not for me to answer, but I think that if we were able to have citizens who say, we want to hear the interview process and be a part, that would be great. But I'm not sure how Richmond Police Department has that set up, or if they have that set up right now.
It's a great point, Robert, and I can follow up with Carol. All right, Daryl, I'll turn it over to you.
Can we unmute Carol? She is on my screen, she's the second page with the number 1804218. She was trying to talk. Is it
Steve, could you help unmute that number? Can you repeat it one more time, Daryl?
It's 804-218-2866. I'm gonna let Carol kick us off.
Steve, can you unmute her?
Yeah, hold on one second. Let me just take a look. What is the number again?
On my screen, she's on the second panel at the bottom, 804-218-2866. She's on her phone.
So what I can do is ask her to unmute, but it doesn't actually
Hello,
unmute them.
can you hear
There
me?
we go. Yes,
Go.
ma'am.
Hi, Carol.
Okay, hi everyone.
Hi, Carol.
I was trying to answer the question. Right now we have, when you talk about recruitment, we have a process, but it's managed by the police department. We have a recruitment division that goes out and to do different, go to different locations to recruit. But as far as the citizens being a part of that process, once the applicants are tested, we don't have that part in place as of yet. I know we have instituted that in our promotional process to some degree with references and stuff like that, but we don't have it in the recruiting process. So that's to answer that question. But so as we get here to today, and Daryl asked me to kick off, being a co-chair of this this activity, this event, this task force has been really unique for me because it's sort of like I'm two people. I'm community and I'm police, but I'm one person. So for me, I just want to thank everyone for their hard work and dedication for the work that we've accomplished through this process. And it's been difficult for all involved at some point in time, but however, the uncomfortable conversations have brought all of us closer and actually revealed our desire to improve our community's relationships revolving around reimagining public safety. And this project has created relationships, friendships, and partnerships amongst us all that has bound us together as we continue working toward the recommendations set forth in this report. And so as Daryl comes on and he's going to talk about the reflections, we started off with reflections. We started off with, what does community mean to us and what does public safety mean to us? And we have all of these words and we all have a different vision and a different viewpoint, a different vantage point. But for me, for this process, it's been great to bring you all, to share with you all a lot of things you all did not know about public safety, only what you saw. So the learning, the sharing has been awesome for me. And I hope and I pray that we continue this. And as we talked about, Natasha, the police liaison, and some communities have them and some don't, but all communities have them, but it's about how they're used. And so one of the things when I go out to talk to neighborhoods or to talk to communities, I encourage them, I ask them, do you know the officers that police your neighborhood? And if you don't, go out, go to the station, go and get to meet them, introduce them. So when you see them in the neighborhood, you know their names. And so I want to continue to encourage all of us to do this so that we can build relationships, but so that we can continue to work together to fix what has brought us all together for this time and for this work. And even though we're introducing the final report, this is just the beginning of the work. So, I'm going to turn it over to Daryl and we're going to go along with our reflections. And thank you for allowing me to be the co-chair of this task force in this project.
Thank you, Carol.
Daryl?
Thank you, Carol. I also want to lift up the fact that Amon has put a comment and a recommendation in the chat as I was going to the chat to type something in. So I just want to at least acknowledge that, make sure we capture that information to the people that's recording this meeting.
I've got it, Daryl. Yep.
Thank you. I want to say, being the co-chair of this meeting, I started off, when I was asked to be on this meeting, be a part of this body, that I was cautiously optimistic. This is not something that I take lightly. I know, when I was asked, I was like, well, why are they asking me? But I was like, I'm not going to be one of those Facebook people that just talk about stuff and not do anything about it. So I was asked to be a part of this. And again, I came in with cautiously optimistic. I think if we reflect back to when we started, it was a lot of, I'm going to tell you, for me, first of all, I was like, okay, you asked me to be on it. Then you asked me to co-chair, like, why are you asking me to do this? Because I recognized there was 40 some odd people that was on this committee from different backgrounds that we don't know each other. And I was like, that first meeting, I don't know if y'all remember that, but my blood pressure went up because I was like, people talking about Robert's rules. I'm like, we ain't use like, it was just like, how do we even have a conversation where we can actually hear each other? So I want to acknowledge where we came from to where we got to. I want to acknowledge that we were able to have difficult conversations. I don't, you know, there were no easy conversations. We were able to hear each other. I do agree with Carol in that we were able to talk to people that we probably wouldn't have talked to if it wasn't for this task force. I really feel like the recommendations that we came up with are solid, right? I stand by those recommendations. I think they're very beautiful. And I think we have to also go back and think about what we're tasked to do. Like we don't have the power, right? So the recommendations that we have, right? We're talking about culture shifting and change, right? So I don't know what will come of this, but you know, it's documented, right? This what we have is documented that we were here and we put forth something that we thought was going to change Richmond in terms of public safety. And I'll contend and I'll say this, what I've learned from this experience is that, you know, there are options, there are other alternatives because we have them in our recommendations, and public safety does not begin and does not end with police. So hopefully the people who can take this thing further will read that, hear that, and actually acknowledge that. What I want us to do is a couple different exercises. So if you're able to get onto, if you're on a computer and you can go to a different window, please go to www.menti.com and put in the code that's in the chat, which is 6750 67 and 7. And there are a couple of prompts that I want us to respond to, okay? And I'm gonna share my screen. Hopefully those who are on their cell phones can see it and can respond. And if you wanna put it in the chat, I'll see if I can open another window and put your comments. You'll put your comments in the chat to respond to this. So we have 2 prompts. The first one is, what is one word to describe how you feel about participating on this task force? So this is going to create a word cloud. So if you can, you know, go to menti.com, put in the code, and just type in one word to describe how you feel about participating on this task force.
And if there's anyone who cannot switch to another screen and wants to say their word out loud, I'm happy to help input that if you're on your phone and you don't have that capability.
Yes, and I'll do the same thing as well. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
And we really want you to put what you actually feel. So I'm seeing some responses come through and I'm gonna read them off. If anybody has one that they want to call out or put into the chat, we can definitely add that. So I'm seeing inspired, challenge, change agent, grit, heard, open-minded, privileged, frustrated, unclear, professional engagement, struggle, growth, learning experience, responsibility, happy, I see struggle. I don't know if I called that one out before. Happy. Somebody put serious challenge. All right, I got one more reflection that I'm asking y'all to complete. Okay. So this next one is as we close, because we're closing, right? Express any appreciations or regret you have for anyone or anything related to the task force. And again, I want to remind you of the guidelines, not to disparage anybody in particular, but you know, if you have an appreciation for someone that you met, some work that somebody's done, you know, definitely give them your say. You can definitely express your appreciation. You can say it out loud, or you can write it in the chat. You know, but any appreciations or regrets you have for anyone or anything related to the task force, appreciations or regrets. A regret could be, you know, I feel like we didn't have enough time to work on, you know, any of the recommendations. That could be an example of a regret. So if we could do that really quickly.
Daryl,
Yes.
can I ask briefly, just so that I'm clear, is this like one answer at a time, or can I put multiple things in this?
You can submit multiple answers. So you do one at a time, submit it, and you can submit again.
Got it. Thank you.
And these should actually start to flow. So someone said, I wish we had more time. I also commend everyone for trying. The work is ongoing. I appreciate the commitment and dedication of all who are involved, including the residents who have been a part of the listening sessions. Someone said, I appreciate working with Sheba. Thankful for everyone's ability to share their unique lived experiences and hoping that we see real change from this process. Glad to meet Natasha. Hope we can work together in the future. I am very appreciative of all the openness and collaboration of the team. My regrets is it's ending and still have so many unanswered questions. I appreciate the commitment of those who have participated and refused to go along to get along. I am thankful for Carol being a role model who embraces what it means to be a guardian of the community and a guardian of her profession. Appreciative of everyone's time and honesty. Our work is just getting started. I appreciate the efforts of everyone on this task force. Thank you to everyone's dedication and time. Special shout out to all of the co-chairs. I'll put somebody else's comments in here. I appreciate getting to know more about the work Sheba and Natasha are doing in RVA. Carol Adams is awesome. I love the authenticity, people speaking their truth and inspiring others to do likewise. Thank you to everyone's dedication and time. Special shout out to all the coaches. I said that already. I learned a lot and respect all of you. And with respect and more work, we can make real progress. Grateful for everyone in the Community Healing and Engagement Committee and the task force overall. I regret we started this task force without collective clarity of what structural racism is and how it affects what we were tasked to address. I am also grateful for the open-mindedness and tenacity of the members on the Community Engagement and Healing Subcommittee. Hashtag massive resistance. Massive resilience, sorry, massive resilience. So yeah, I'm thank you all for doing that. And I want to share one last thing. These guidelines, I've used them many times in the past when I do presentations, when I do trainings around, DEI stuff in terms of, an organizational culture. And I think they're really powerful. So I want us to bring us back to where we started. Carol also has some other guidelines, but, again, I think these guidelines can be really helpful when we want to have difficult dialogues with people from different backgrounds. So for me, I try to incorporate them in my everyday life. I've copied them. I put them in my office back at my office. I have them up just as a reminder. There's a last one that I learned that I want to share with you all. And I think it was sort of kind of covered in some of the comments people made on the regrets, right? And it says, expect and accept the feeling of lack of closure, right? So as we're coming to a close, I know I feel like I don't have a feeling of closure. I feel like there's still a lot of work to be done, right? I feel like these recommendations can actually be implemented. I wish we can, just go out and do them tomorrow. Expecting and accepting the feeling of lack of closure doesn't mean accepting things as they are, right? It's just saying, okay, for where we are, accepting this leg of the work is done, right? And it also can include what do we need to do next, right? So hopefully this isn't the end of any of the work because I know a lot of us are doing individual and collective work, and we have influence in different spheres that we come in contact with. So hopefully this is not over with. Hopefully that we can take what we've learned and magnify that out. So I'm going to close with saying thank you all for allowing, at least engaging and trusting each other in going into this process. So that's where I would leave it.
Thank you so much, Daryl and Carol, for your powerful words and for everyone else's input on those word clouds. That was really wonderful to see that feedback and your perspectives of where the task force has come from and is going, and will certainly continue, past this meeting. Absolutely. Brian, I'll turn it over to you now to close us out.
Thank you so very much. And thanks to each of you once again. I tried to share my screen. Hopefully you guys can see it. I'll be extremely brief, but I want to kind of provide a kind of outside kind of perspective, kind of looking in. Of course, you all know that I'm not from Richmond, not from the state of Virginia. But I do want to kind of reflect upon my participation with the task force as we kind of reimagine public safety and kind of re-envision community well-being. The initial onboarding session, I kind of share with you Peel's principles and kind of highlighted as the blueprint, especially the 7th principle that highlights there's a shared sense of responsibility, if you will, in terms of promoting a good community. So I want to kind of bring that back into focus a bit, that there should not be a distinction between the public and the police. We all live and reside in the same kind of area. That's the theory. But of course, over the course of our time being together, we understand that it's difficult for that theory to kind of play out in practice. And we've had presentations that really highlighted that. Dr. Utsey's presentation really highlighted those historical problems that even ripple out to today. So the task force really emerged at the intersection of this pandemic within a pandemic, if you will. Intersection of racial reckoning and reimagining community well-being. And we were kind of tasked with, let's think about how can we be proactive in a coactive or collaborative way instead of being reactive. And this is the visual that emerged in my mind when I reflected upon our experience. Here's an opportunity for the city of Richmond, its police department, its community to be responsive to the needs of the public. And what we set up was a task force that focuses in on 3 focal areas. The major driving one to me is that community engagement and healing, to impact use of force, but also to provide much more of a human service lens when we think about calls for service. But our task force is beyond just reimagining policing. It's beyond just reimagining public safety. It's about how do we reimagine, restructure, reorganize community. And the process we really kind of utilized was going from awareness to understanding to acknowledgement to action. So the charge was really to participate in the public governance process, where we could help each other become much more aware, to better understand, and ultimately to acknowledge that there have been historic and contemporary harms that impact community well-being. And that requires public action that is not only just corrective, but most importantly, collective. So we kind of engaged in this kind of equitable kind of collaboration kind of process. Well, it's all about equitable representation that was intentional, that was purposeful, that was all about seeking the truth, telling the truth, acknowledging these historic and contemporary harms, being aware of how trauma plays out in this kind of a space, and utilize all of that to transform a community, right? To transform structures, to transform individuals, right? To transform organizations. The underpinnings of this, if you really look at it, goes back to a guy here at the UVA, Frank Dukes, that I see as being one of the underpinnings. Equitable engagement and collaboration. At its core, it's trauma-informed. And that's what we've tried to do, right? It's intentionally inclusive, it's responsive, it's seeking the truth, it's deliberative, but it's flexible and adaptive. So our process, we utilize for the most part, the latter 2 bullets. Some listening and learning with the sessions, but we really tried to ground this whole process in this kind of community collaborative change process, where instead of having a top-down kind of understanding and perspective of what's taking place, much more of a bottom-up, but also influence from the side too. So trying to make it much more of a kind of panoramic perspective and understanding. So our efforts were to be proactive, and I think we were proactive with our recommendations. And I think we're trying to be as coactive and collaborative as we can be, with an appreciation that being reactive is not good enough, right? The damage has been done. How do we prevent it? In our efforts, we've tried to attract people with different lived experiences, right? To cultivate the type of relationships where they can speak their truths, share their lived experiences, and then utilize this information to kind of how do we navigate these diverse perspectives, right? In an equitable way. In essence, it's all about adding some missing voices to the community choir. When we think about these policies, we think about these practices, it is apparent that a lot of voices haven't been included. So it's all about how do we attract people into our community choir to achieve the necessary harmony that's needed to make a joyful noise. And what we're doing basically is we're offering some recommendations to the director, right? Whoever that director might be, the broader public. But I think we concluded that our efforts will never end. They have to be ongoing, right? We have to, how do we prepare the next generation to kind of accept the baton, to run the race that we're running? So we're at the convergence of change when we think about the recommendations that are being offered, right? And at the core driving this change is how do we make sure that things are much more equitable, right? Based upon this process, where we become aware, understand, acknowledge these problems, and then act upon those problems that we all share. Going from this whole notion of empathy, sympathy, to compassionate, corrective, collective action on the parts of all, those within the public service, right? Public institutions, but also those within community. So I just want to share some lessons learned from my perspective. it's a work in progress. It will never end. And that's a good thing, I think, right? What I've learned too is that representation and relationships matter, right? But I've also learned when we think about this representation and having these relationships, they really, really matter, is because this process, even though it's meaningful, it can be messy, right? Even though it's intentional, you know, sometimes feelings might get hurt a little bit because maybe someone's lived experiences aren't someone else's lived experiences. But we have to be determined in spite of being sometimes in distress. What I've also learned is that there are certain requirements for equitable representation, where we all have to be brave, where we all have to be bold. We all have to embrace this notion of being intentionally inclusive. We have to be empathetic, and we have to be flexible. The first onboarding session, I kind of highlighted the concept of team. I want to return back to it. A team is more than a collection of people. It is a process of give and take. And again, this is an ongoing process. How do we continue to give, but also how do we continue to receive too? To build a strong team, you must see someone else's strength as a complement to your weakness and not a threat to your position. We have to continue to lean in and embrace this quote. And I'd just like to kind of wrap up with how I started off too. Coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, working together is success. I think we've tried to serve as role models of us coming together, keeping together, working together. But what we have to do is continue to encourage those within our spheres of influence to follow the path that we followed. I want to kind of share just my thanks to all of those who have participated in this process. First and foremost, those in the listening and learning sessions, right? But also all of the participants on the task force, the co-chairs of the subgroups, our collective co-chairs, Daryl and Carol. But I also want to give a special shout out to those staffers across government, across other nonprofit organizations who've provided resources and information to us, the various speakers who've enlightened us and informed us. But I also want to kind of give a shout out to my research assistants too, who have been dutiful, punctual, professional in terms of sitting in, collecting notes, generating reports. And I'm just thankful for the opportunity you guys have allowed me, an outsider, to be a part of this process. And I'm looking forward to brighter days. We will have some dark points and dark times, but light will shine through the darkness. And I commend each of you for all that you have done on behalf of the city of Richmond and that entire community.
Thank you so much, Brian, for bringing us together and closing us out again as you kick this task force off with Daryl and Carol almost 90 days ago now. And so we really have come a long way. We absolutely have lots of work to do. This is not, you know, as I think a number of folks have said, this is not the end of our work. It's just the beginning. We've gotten our initial and we're coming up on our final recommendations, our final report. But again, there's so much work to engage the community and educate the community on where we want to go as a city and as a task force. You all are so powerful and so you're going to be key in ensuring that those recommendations are implemented. And I feel incredibly lucky to have been given the task to help facilitate this task force and get to know all of you. Being not from Richmond originally, it's been a great opportunity to just understand the powerful people that make up Richmond. So it's really been an honor to be part of this task force with everyone here. Just want to say thank you and looking forward to getting your final reports, and you'll certainly be hearing from me as we pull that together and as we take next steps. So thanks everyone, and I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend.